We're live.
We're live, but our video, our start is not available. But I want to introduce everybody to our show. And you know that we have a promo, but I'm not seeing it on screen. We're having some gremlins. We always do every show, it seems, when we have a guest. But we're grateful to have a wonderful woman. Her name is Mindy Tautfest. She is a published author, a speaker, and a television personality renowned for her pioneering work in the UFO investigation industry. As the owner of the CEO of the Hayden C. Hewes International UFO Bureau, she leads efforts to transform our understanding of unidentified flying objects, which is now UAPs, and unidentified anomalous phenomena, integrating decades of documented research with a cutting edge technological innovation. She's dedicated to exploring the nature, origins, and capabilities of these phenomena. Her leadership provides data driven approaches to enhance scientific understanding, inform global policies, and prepare humanity for potential contact events with this phenomena. Welcome, Mindy. And we are
Thank you.
sorry for not having an intro. For some reason, it did not come up.
That's fine. Thank you guys for having me. It's so good to connect with all of you today.
Thank you.
Yeah, we're glad to have you.
We have the Paranormal Rangers, Stan Milford. We're so grateful to have you here because we know you've been on a book tour with your new book, The Paranormal Ranger. And we have Jonathan, who's currently on the road. But we are so grateful that you're able to pipe in, John. And it's all three of us here today. Our other UK partners we're going to be on, but there have been some health issues with one of them, but we will have them on soon. So we're grateful to have everybody here today that could make it. So on with the show. So Mindy, can you tell us what you've been up to in the field that you've been working on for the last years that you've been working with UAPs and so on and so forth?
Well, yeah, I got my start after 2016. I had a brain aneurysm, and it led to a near-death experience over in the void. And being a Southern Baptist pastor's wife, that of course was something I wasn't expecting. And it took years to process. And in going through those steps, I ended up putting out my book, Dying to Meet Them. And it was looking at exactly what was revealed to me over in the void and kind of comparing it with what I was seeing from working with ET experiencers and having the same kind of outcomes and the same kind of trauma responses, and even going back into childhood, having the same kind of personality underlying that led into these kinds of encounters. And so I kind of break down all of those things and relook at Dr. Kenneth Ring's research from back in the early 90s, whenever he actually did the Omega Project and brought together near-death experiencers and UAP experiencers to see their commonalities. And so I kind of walk through that in my book. After that, I ended up getting involved with MUFON, which is the Mutual UFO Network, and climbed the ranks there pretty quickly and ended up becoming the director of training there. And in doing that, I actually created the entire curriculum that all field investigators use worldwide, and learning how to investigate UFO sightings and how to identify things that we can to rule out misidentifications and really narrow it down to just the truly unexplained. And recently I ended up leaving MUFON in order to restart the International UFO Bureau. That ended up coming along. I had done an investigation which was featured on Ancient Aliens, where I met my good friend John down here. And ended up digging more into that investigation over and over. And I kept coming across a gentleman named Hayden Hewes. And I thought, man, I've got to get a hold of this guy because he's here in Oklahoma. And he was actually out in that area back in the 60s. And I'd like to look through his files. So I ended up tracking down his widow, found out that he had passed in 2017. And she said, well, I have all of his archives. I have all of these boxes of stuff. If you like them, you're more than welcome to have them. And so I said, wonderful. Let me go ahead and get those and work with an archivist to get everything digitized. And so that was kind of the first step in reopening the Bureau. And after leaving MUFON, there have just been so many people coming out in droves and support saying, why don't you restart this? Why don't we look more into the analysis of the things that we know? And so that's kind of the turn that we're taking now in restarting the Bureau, is doing deep analysis of all of these archives that we have and all of these databases, feeding them all in and pulling deep data from it, what we can really learn from it, because no one's really looking at who is behind this and what their technology is, and really narrowing it down, because there may be several different things that we are seeing. Some of this may be interdimensional, some of this may be coming from the ocean, some of this may be coming from outer space. We don't know until we start kind of breaking up that data and looking at, okay, is it triangles or seen over land? Are these around cave systems? Is this where people are reporting abductions by grays or tall whites? What kind of informed conclusions can we come to from looking at the data as a whole? And so that's kind of what we're jumping into now with the Bureau.
That's wonderful, Mindy. John, any thoughts?
Well, it's you could say it's about time that somebody's taking a little bit different approach. It's needed. A lot of what we've seen in the past is, the same old investigations, the same old thing. I saw this go from here to here, in the sky, 2 seconds. Um, and we really need to be looking at it from a multifaceted view, from a lot of different perspectives. Try to make the case that there's more going on than what other, and so I see that that this is really good. Yeah, I think I pull a lot more information out, be a lot more revealing.
Right. Well, and what you're doing, you and Stan, and going out to the indigenous cultures and responding to those sightings there, and even as Michelle is collecting, some of the traditions, those are things that have been left out of the analysis for decades. Everyone's looking at the technological capabilities, but there is so much knowledge there from our indigenous cultures, from ancient cultures, things that we know have been happening for thousands of years. We have to take those into account. Once we start looking at it as a whole, then we can start understanding if the technology has changed at all. Has the phenomena changed at all? Is there any threat actually with any of these different types of phenomena and the way they're presenting? So I think that we can only learn from being able to take an inclusive approach to analyzing all of this information. There's just so much. We have the archives from the 50s and 60s when our government was starting to look into it. We have the ancient tablets. We have the ancient traditions. We have so much knowledge that we need to be taking all of the information together to really get an inclusive and a whole understanding of what has been happening and what this may mean for the future.
You know, Mindy, we had an
Yeah.
earlier discussion in prior coming on the show about these files that you've retrieved, and with your background, with your NDE's experience, and how you got into this field, what is the most fascinating documented story that you've come across with you collecting files and information with the phenomena that you talk about?
I'll go ahead and share my screen for you then with that one.
Okay.
Let's see here. We need my Google Drive. I'd say the most important one that we have in our Bureau archive right here is the Jimmy Carter report. And this right here is actually a letter that Hayden Hewes had sent to Jimmy Carter when he was out on the campaign trail. Now, this is before he became president, but he had seen something while he was out campaigning, and Hayden heard about it, and he said, hey, would you mind filing an official report with the International UFO Bureau? And Jimmy Carter actually did. So let's see if we can. Okay, here is the part of the actual report where he responded. And here's Jimmy Carter's signature here. And I know it's kind of fuzzy on here to actually be able to read it. But it includes all of the information that he provided Hayden in that initial report. Um, let's see. And I had sent you some of these things. This is actually some of the information for Project Blue Book that was sent to Hayden. And I know that he was working with the officials out at Right Path, because they actually invited him out there and showed him pictures of UFOs at the time. And I'd included this here, government officials to release the facts about UFOs. And this is obviously from back in the 60s and 70s. I thought it was kind of funny because we're seeing the same headlines over and over. And these are kind of out of order here. There's another from the Jimmy Carter report. You skip forward here.
How did you obtain these files? Was it a direct relationship to the individual who had these files, or is it part of where you were before with the organization that you just left?
Well, it was Hayden Hewes, actually, his widow lives about a mile from me. And so I was able to easily connect with her. And just in speaking with her, she said, honey, you know, Hayden would want you to have these and to make them available to the public. So that's what I've been working on this last year, was just trying to get everything digitized. That way it is easily accessible to the public. And so there's some of these that are newspaper clippings and stuff. Government UFO records may come off these dusty shelves, and we've been hearing that forever. Let's see. I'm just kind of skipping through because these are not in order here. But that's how I came. Go ahead.
It was really interesting with President Carter, you know, for him to come out and disclose that during a time where things were not readily accepted. And my mother, this is when I was in middle school, worked under his administration. She was commissioner for the status of women in the New Mexican state, was appointed that commission and would go back to Washington. And I remember her speaking about this, and I didn't understand what she was talking about, you know, when she was talking about Jimmy Carter just came out with reports about aliens and such. And I was like, oh, I don't understand what that means, Mom. I have no idea.
Yeah, your mom knew. Well, and we've known about it for a long time. And that's one thing you and I have talked about is it's 2024. We're about to go into 2025. It's time to look past disclosure. That's been the buzzword for, decades now. We know this is real. We now need to understand it, because still talking about disclosure, still trying to get the government to admit what it knows. The phenomenon's rolling on. It's going to continue happening, whether the government, the US government admits to it or not. So while it used to be exciting and it's still nice to have that confirmation coming out. Us as researchers, we can continue looking into the phenomena, knowing that it's real and understanding it on a deeper level, because I think 95% of the government doesn't understand it. That's why we see this push from Congress, and we see like the report that just came out on Immaculate Constellation that was just released, and we know that this technology is well beyond. I mean, part of it explained, these UAP outmaneuvering F-22s. Well, that's our highest technology that we're aware of to the general public. But why would we waste our time battling our own technology, and testing it where it is putting F-22 pilots into danger? It doesn't make any sense. So I think that on a large scale, the government really does not understand what's going on. And they're looking to people like yourself and like the Rangers and myself that are looking at it in a deeper way to understand really what is happening with everything. And I think that more and more Congress is going to be open to independent researchers and to pull that information if our government's not being forthright.
Right. Hey, any thoughts, Dan? I mean, based on where you've been as a law enforcement officer, that you've seen any type
Well,
of activity yourself?
a couple of things. Right now we're at a point where, like in modern U.S. history, we have had a number of UFO investigators and researchers that have gotten to the age where they are elderly and they are passing on, a lot of them. I
Mhm.
mean, Stanton Friedman and others are passing on. So it leaves these archives uh, basically out there. And I think it's important in what you're doing, Mindy, to actually volunteer to acquire those files and to keep them secure and protected, and because it's a huge undertaking. It's I can't even imagine, the responsibility and everything that would go into uh, keeping that archive safe, and even like what you've done as far as digitizing this information so it's readily available for researchers and for the public. But we're at a point where there's so many of these researchers that uh, they do have a lifetime, a lot of times, a lifetime of research information, and I think that information is critical for the world and for the average person to be able to review that information and have formulate their own understanding of these phenomena. And so I think we're at a point where uh, we're at this critical juncture in humanity where we really need to come together to be able to ensure that all of that information is readily available. Instead of individuals saying, "Oh, this is mine. it's mine, and I want to covet it and monetize it, and here I'll sell you bits and pieces of information." Instead of things like that, I think it's critical that that information is available for all of mankind, and so yeah, I think we're at a very critical point in this day and time.
Well, I think you've got the absolute correct approach. Is we have got to get these archives out of dusty basements and storage units. There is so much more information that we can pull, especially looking at some of these from the 50s and 60s and 70s. We have such advanced technology. I think how much it's,
Right.
has advanced over the last
Yeah.
40, 50 years. And to be able to look at some of these older cases and apply new techniques to it, even within lab analysis. I mean, we have DNA analysis now. That wasn't available back in the 50s and 60s.
Right.
There is so much more that we can uncover because there's still samples laying around in places in people's basements that have just been in boxes. And so to pull these out, anything that's on paper, to be able to digitize it. I know that we have a big file in the Hayden archives of the Aurora crash, and there's analysis that they did on the well water back in the 70s. Well, how does that compare to what we know now from it? And, you know, is there anything more we can learn from the current state of it? So we can kind of track to see if things have changed. We can apply new technologies. And by bringing these archives to the front, we've got to find a way to put them in a centralized place where everybody can access it. And I know that there's the archive center that, and I'm blanking on his name, the gentleman out in Arizona or New Mexico. Do you know who I'm speaking of, that has all the archives?
Dave Marler?
Yes, Marler.
Dave
Thank you.
Marler. Yeah. Yeah.
Yes. And so he's done an incredible, I can't even imagine the amount of work that that gentleman has done, because I have one
Right.
archive,
Right.
you know, and to have it all in one centralized place where people can access it is wonderful. But we've got to take that a step further and get it digitized, because once you have it digitized, you can pull the information from those documents where, you know, it can learn everything that's on there and make it searchable. That way we can
Searchable.
compare. Yes.
It's critical to do that. The
that's
other thing you mentioned that is really critical is you said some of these files, paper files, are in let's say basements, you know, in a file cabinet somewhere. We've recently seen an incident, a weather incident, disaster in Roswell itself. I mean, there was a huge amount of flooding that occurred there. There was, I believe I'd heard some of the museum. There's a museum there, and I heard some of that. Their property got damaged, and so I mean, that's kind of scary because you have these paper files that could actually be destroyed by a natural weather occurrence, you know, flooding, and
that's a huge
that's
concern.
scary. Yeah, it is
I
definitely.
know that in speaking with, there's a gentleman named Tommy Bland that was an investigator with the International UFO Bureau back when Hayden had it open. And he had spoken about a fire that happened at Hayden's home I wasn't even aware of, that destroyed a lot of his archive. So what I've got is just what's left. And
Yeah,
to have all of these from all different places, that was my immediate concern too, is, you know, the protection of it, because with acts of God, you can't control what happens to the
right.
paper files. We have got to get them digitized. And then another step into being able to have them searchable and cross reference between them, because you may have something in your archive and you have one over here, and they're actually going to corroborate and fill in some blanks in our understanding. So I think that this is really kind of the future of what we're moving into with UAP research. Yes, we need to still continue taking new reports and understanding what's happening in our skies and in our oceans right now. But we also have a wealth of information, like I said, going back thousands of years even, that we need to bring it all together and really say, okay, what do we have? What can we understand from this? And so that's kind of what we're looking at, is looking at getting that just overall approach. And it's massive. You know, the amount of database that's going to be needed to put all of this information in, and then to apply the AI analytics to it to be able to pull the information out that we're seeking. It's going to be a massive undertaking, but
Yeah,
I have some really good people that have come together. We have a gentleman from NASA that was the chief of aerospace medicine. We have a guy from NORAD that was the air domain chief from NORAD. So we have so many different specialties that are coming together, and like yourself and Michelle and John here, we are pulling together so many different people with different understandings of the phenomena, and to be able to have those wider conversations of, well, this is what I know, well, this is what I know. We can narrow down on things that truly are human made, and focus in on what's truly unexplained, and then look at it from all these different perspectives. So I think that we're seeing the start of something,
Mindy,
with this turn in thinking.
She thinks you're froze
Min-
up.
Mindy,
Yeah.
have you developed a protocol, a listing of just like what you said, as far as being able to digitize these type of archives and files, so that they are searchable and that kind of thing, like a listing? Let's say somebody does have these files, what needs to be done to preserve them and to protect them? Do you have a listed protocol with them that others could use? Or I know you've written, for MUFON, you've written a lot of the, if not all of it, the training manual that's used for investigators. But I do think that something like that does need to be developed, where these individuals that all of a sudden, when somebody has passed that had these kind of research files, that they'll know what to do and how to go about that, instead of mankind losing that information. At
Right.
least maybe somebody can step in and protect it, and you know.
Yeah, for myself, I'm working with a gentleman named Chris Jordan that has Curious Research, and he has all the capabilities to digitize everything. And so that's the route I went. And I know that Chris is open to working with others that might have archives. I believe he's working with Daniel Allen Jones now to digitize Jim Marrs files. So you could go that route with someone like him. MUFON also has Project Aquarius, where they're working on digitizing and making things available to the public. And then, of course, there's the physical archives, like we were just discussing with Marlar out there. But again, I would very much, recommend getting things digitized. Now that we have those capabilities, that's really where we need to be looking, because again, we can pull that information from those PDFs and make it searchable. And with AI models and stuff, we're able to just type in, we're not having to go through and look case by case. We can type in an overarching question, and it can pull that data from all of the different sources that we've fed into it. So, that would be what I would recommend. Either reach out to someone like Chris Jordan at Curious Research, or even MUFON, because MUFON's, they've put together quite a library there with Project Aquarius. So as long as we're sharing and we're, all coming together and trying to figure this out on a bigger scale.
Not only is the issue case management files and actual physical paper archives, but I've been recently approached by an unnamed individual who has physical evidence from a UFO crash, and the actual physical evidence. How do we preserve that and ensure, that it's going to be protected for mankind and for future generations, to be able to analyze and study that evidence. And I think we're at a point where these kind of issues need to be looked at, need to be like you said earlier in your life, where you are part of a think tank. Well, I do think there needs to be a group of people, like-minded people, um, with the same mission, so to speak, and motivation, and to be able to protect this kind of information, because we're going to see more and more of this stuff right now. We're only really on the front edge of that, and I think we're going to see more and more and more of these files, and we're going to be seeing stuff that's going to be really blowing mankind's mind when they start seeing some of this evidence and stuff. So something to
Right.
think about.
With the evidence, actual physical evidence, that would need to go to someone like Gary Nolan. I would recommend always, if there's a possibility of it, to segment out and keep a portion of the evidence. If it's a soil sample, if you can keep part of it before sending it on, that way, things don't get necessarily lost in transit. And if they
Yeah. Oh
do,
yeah.
you have something to go back on. So that's always first and foremost, is try to at least, divide it if at all
Right.
possible. Then make
Right.
sure that you're sending it to a certified lab that you trust. I know with the
Gary
MUFON,
Nolan, who is he with? Who is Gary with?
He's an independent
Oh, he
geneticist,
is.
and
Oh,
we hoped that one day we'll get him on this show. I have that. Yeah. He's a really nice young man.
okay.
Um,
I see.
yeah, he has labs all over the world, and he has tested some of the mitochondria that have come from these area crashes. So Gary is a well known in his industry and other
Okay.
things he does as a
I see.
private contractor. Yeah. Mindy, I think the reason why people have stuck their paperwork in their basement, there's a safety factor here. Back in the time when things didn't want to be disclosed, people's lives were being threatened
Right.
um, because of this very factor of having these documents or research that they've done diligently throughout their lives. And like you said, Stan, earlier, some of our individuals who have these records have gone on, they've moved on, and yet their dreams have always been get my information out there, because I think the world needs to learn and know about what's been going on under our noses. And these things are real. They're very much a part of our world, and we're not being told. So, Mindy, what you're doing is very forthcoming. Even in the Native American community, you and I have spoken about databasing Native American stories that I have researched and have gathered, throughout my time up in the Uinta Basin investigating and interviewing, that we need to have people come and know that they're in a safe place, and that we're going to keep this for future reference and not to be sold, not to be just not kept in files, and that they can actually go and investigate these files. And so people need to have a place to go to feel that safety factor.
Right.
absolutely. Well, you bring up a couple of different things. So with the new reporting, we have such capabilities now. I know that, yeah, I did write all of the stuff. Me and Terry Lynn Keel, a good friend of mine, uh, together we wrote MUFON University and all of the training, everything that's in there. But beyond that, we have capabilities to now cut down on most of that work that we taught the investigators how to do. We can automatically call back that information to uh, check any new reports against astronomical data, against the flight radar data, against any meteors, any, the satellites, any of the misidentifications that we sometimes get. Those can automatically be called back with that information to see if it lines up. And so that's going to cut down on a large percentage of the misidentifications. Now, what's left is kind of lights in the sky that are unidentified. And then the other is experiencers. And so that's something that we, now in acknowledging, we see the government acknowledging UAP phenomena. They don't even want to talk about the non-human intelligence behind it and encounters with this, because this has been going on again for thousands of years.
Right.
So we have to take into account the trauma that can be experienced with these kind of encounters. Not all are traumatic. Some see them as wonderful. But I think that with me being a near-death experiencer, and I think especially because mine was a traumatic experience. I didn't go to heaven. I didn't see Jesus, and I was a pastor's wife. I was so scared and confused and out of my element, and I had no control over where I was. I see within the near-death community people that have meditated their way into the void, and they're saying it's wonderful. It's so peaceful. Well, you're still connected to your body. I was violently thrust from mine after a very traumatic medical episode. There is trauma upon trauma upon trauma that happens with these kind of encounters, and that's mimicked in the UFO arena. Whenever we have someone who has been ripped out of their environment, they have no control over what's happening to them. They're confronted by entities that they didn't even know existed, and then put back into their bedroom or wherever they were taken from, going, what in the world just happened? And they're scared to tell anyone. They go through the very same kind of traumas that like what I went through. So I understand on that basis, not being abducted. I'm not an abductee, but I understand the trauma that can be attached to these kind of encounters, and that's something we have really got to start embracing. And I know in the past it's been looked at as kind of silly. I remember in the 90s growing up and seeing videos of contactees, and they're at these meetings and stuff, and I'm like, do you really think people are getting abducted? Being a kid trying to understand this. I think it's time to move past that. We know that these things are happening. We know these people are being abducted multiple times, and many times in the same families. And so there are things we need to be discussing with them and helping them work through on, just a human level. And that is one of the things I'm hoping to come out of, understanding the phenomena better and who's getting targeted. We know there's some markers there. But I'm hoping there's a much more gentle approach to abductees, more acceptance of them, and not so much ridicule in the future.
That was a big effort for my book, is to try to convey a message to the masses that these things are real. The people do experience, whether it's extraterrestrial related or hauntings, or even encounters with what people call Bigfoot and UFOs. For the most part, these people that are experiencing this for the first time, they are traumatized. It doesn't matter whether they're a 10-year-old child or an 80-year-old person. It can be just equally as traumatizing. And even in my own experiences of seeing one of these little gray aliens standing at the foot of my bed, it can change your worldview, your universe view, so to speak.
Absolutely. I think there's an automatic dissonance that happens immediately whenever you're confronted by something like this. I don't see how it couldn't. I know for me, being a near-death experiencer, going over to the void, it completely changed all my thoughts on what I had been taught in religion and what I really thought about the makeup. There is intelligence that comes with being in contact with that kind of powerful encounter. And that's part about what I wrote about in my book, is what I came back with from the void. It was almost like it was impressed in my spirit. And I think that ET experiencers and people that have had ongoing paranormal encounters, there's something different. That we understand it on a different level because we're experiencing it every day. And that's the one thing, UAP is the one thing that I have not encountered. I've seen, unidentified lights in the sky, but as far as being abducted, I've not, but I've had ongoing encounters with Hat Man, shadow beings since I was a child. I've had, spirit encounters and just all kinds of paranormal unexplained things. So that's one thing I know. Some that, and we see this in the research arena a lot. There's some more on the military side that are only comfortable with the nuts and bolts. They want to know the technology and the capabilities. And then we have the experiencers over here saying, no, there's so much more. There's a consciousness element to this.
Oh yeah.
And the others aren't quite there yet. So we
Right.
have kind of a disconnect. And there, we've got to find a way to bring these back together where we're honoring both the physical and the spirit all in one, because we know that both of those affect our environment. And we're not looking at it as a whole for the most part. We're just looking at the physical, or we're just looking at the spiritual. And I think that kind of divided with, back in the day when the church took over. We'll do all of the spirit things. You guys worry about the science over there. But it's done us a disservice. We've got to bring it back. We've got to understand how the spirit affects the physical, because we know that, like, there's the observer effect. Consciousness has an effect on the physical. We know this. So how is that playing into the UAP phenomena? That's the next thing we really need to be looking at.
John and I had a really good friend named Clifford Mahudi, who was a Zuni elder. And in learning from him, he really reiterated this idea that you hear from indigenous cultures and indigenous societies and people, that everything is interconnected. Everything, there's a network of connection with everything. Consciousness, all of these things that we're referring to as paranormal, supernatural, and even your experience in a near-death experience. All of that stuff is interconnected in some way. We today, as mankind, we're still wandering around like a little toddler, with poopy pants, because this stuff, you walk in the canyons on the Navajo Reservation, you look at the pictographs and petroglyphs that have been there hundreds, if not thousands of years in some situations. And this information conveys a message that these contacts have been happening for maybe even before mankind began walking on this little blue marble, and so the idea of disclosure with many indigenous cultures, it's ludicrous, it's laughable, because indigenous people have known these things have been there for thousands of years, and it's not something that, the U.S. government might want to dangle this over our heads, like a little lapdog, that, hey, we're going to give you this information and stuff. It's laughable because we've known it's been there for thousands of years. So anyway.
Mindy, it's in our creation stories. When the Navajos talk about the creation stories, they talk about the ant people, and when there was a cataclysmic event that would happen on surface, we were taken down into the tunnels, the caves below, and it was the ant people that came. And then and when the reemergence of the Navajo or the Anasazis, whatever the ancient peoples were at that time, then when it was safe to come back to the surface, that's when we were reintroduced to the world on the surface. So that's also in our religious, teachings.
Well, there's 570 something tribes here in the United States, but even more so in Canada and Mexico and other places, South America, that a lot of these indigenous peoples have these similar creation stories,
Absolutely.
that some of them align with each other. I mean, you look at the references to what people call Bigfoot or Sasquatch. You have the Yowie and the Yeti in places like Australia and New Zealand, and in the Himalayas, and then in the south, the southern part of the United States, swamp ape, and so you know, I think a lot of these things are interconnected. The shape shifting entities that we see, John and I have always felt there's an interconnection with all of these things, no matter where you go. So,
Well, one of the things to think about that um, historically, when our founding fathers put everything down, and they said that they didn't want church and state to be uh, put together, and they at the time you have that historically a lot of them left England because you only had really choices as far as religion. One of them was church, which was actually Henry VIII. And he created so that he could divorce his wife and somebody else. So there you go. You have politics together. Later on, you had Martin Luther and the Reformation and all that stuff. So they were leaving the UK and coming to America to have freedom. Now, like we said, fathers remain this idea that you God created everything, then He just let it run on it and didn't have more. And so all of that, and the founding fathers, that religious influence, they did not want what we see today in politics, that bring back.
We lost him.
Communication. We were losing connection. Mindy, could you relate your Hatman story for the audience? Talk about
Oh
that.
goodness.
Yeah. I know. I mean, we've been talking a lot about the archiving aspect, which is very important. And we lost Stan. We're
It's just us girls.
it's just girls, yeah. But yeah, could
Yeah.
you relate that to the audience a little bit about what the Hat Man is?
Sure. Well, it's a typical shadow person, and this started when I was very young. I actually speak about it in my book in chapter 6, and I had written that chapter for Ray Hernandez for his part of his series for a Greater Reality, and that kind of kicked off me writing my entire book. But so it's kind of just a little sampling of paranormal things I've encountered throughout my life, and kind of a little fun chapter, I guess, if you want to call it that. But this started whenever we moved into a new home when I was 8. And like that first night that we moved in, I felt something kind of staring at me. I could feel it peering. And I was 8 years old, and I was sleeping on the floor because we hadn't moved in the furniture or anything. But as I grew up, I'd say I was probably 12, 13 whenever it really started showing up in force. I was very deep into youth group, going to, Baptist youth camp and stuff like that. And so I did not understand why I was having these encounters with this dark entity, because for years I would see just kind of the fleeting shadow that you hear, and you catch something out of the corner of your eye, out of your periphery. And it eventually evolved until I could actually see the thing. And as I got, I don't know if it was maybe because I was a teen girl, had all the hormones going, it seemed to feed off of it and made it only stronger. And I could see it would have a tall top hat and a long cape, and it would come down the hallway. And one time my mom said, she saw me looking out down the hall, and she was like, "What are you looking at?" And I said, "There's a shadow. It's a man, and he has a hat." And she said, "I've seen him too." And so as we started, discussing it openly, we would hear our voice, our our names being called in voices from our family around the house. Like I would hear my name called by my mom's voice, and mom wouldn't even be home. So these kinds of things were happening all the time. And it finally escalated until one night, um, I heard my mother screaming. I literally saw the hat man there. I saw red glowing eyes uh, over in the corner with his outline. And then he was gone. I was petrified. And then I heard
Thank you.
my mom screaming. And so I broke free from, kind of being paralyzed in fear and ran in there. And my mom's laying there with her feet about a foot or two hanging off the end of the bed. And she said, it grabbed my ankles. It literally had pulled her from the end of the bed. So I spent a lot of my youth out partying, staying with friends, anything I could do to stay away from that house. I was terrified of it. And I know a lot of people say that they're not necessarily evil or anything. Again, I didn't understand it. No one was speaking to me about these things. I always knew about ghosts and stuff like that. I had seen spirits of past loved ones. Before I met my
Okay.
husband, I had a
How much?
couple of spirits that I would feel around me, and I knew their names. And whenever I met my husband and
Where is it?
actually went to a farm
Well, burn
after
it.
we had been dating a while, I asked him, well, who's Victor and who's Anna? And he goes, well, Victor's my grandfather, and Anna was an aunt. And they both lived here on the farm. And I said, well, my goodness, they were around for a couple of months before I ever even met you. So, I've always had these kind of spirit encounters that have surrounded me. But the Hat Man in particular, uh, thankfully, he stayed at my mother's house. I've had other run-ins since then, since getting married and having children of my own. My children are terrified of that part of the house. You can still very much feel the presence there. So I don't know if it's got to be connected to either my mother or the home itself.
It- you know,
Mindy,
last week we had a episode about children and the paranormal. And the reason why I asked this is because someone very close to me had a child has had the exact same experience, and every time they visit me, um, descriptive, very descriptive in the period costume that this individual, the Hat Man, has. And so, it's really interesting that we should be archiving also children's stories and keeping them safe. And you just solidified you growing up with this phenomena in your house. This very close relative of mine is growing up with the same thing, but keeps bringing it over and over. And their little minds are trying to deal with it, but very descriptive. They're not going to lie about these individual situations or phenomena that happens to them. I mean, each of us have seen things. I have seen entities, got made fun of, so you kind of clam up, and we've got to have a sharing. I'm all about safety. The Rangers are all
I'll
about
let you drive to Sam's.
safety, protocols that, it's okay and not make fun of and take them seriously because, we have so many things going on. I think Stan had a question for you.
at that time, Mindy, did you have difficulty because and or your relationship with the church and or your family's relationship? I know with some churches, when members are experiencing what is known as paranormal or supernatural, there can be some conflict between the church and those individuals and what they're experiencing. Sometimes they get support, sometimes they don't. Sometimes they're ostracized or shunned from the church side. And I was just wondering what your experience was.
Well, I was very deep into the church, and I was very devout. I was raised Foursquare Pentecostal, and then became Baptist as a teenager, and then married my husband, who I ended up meeting him to speak with him about the Hat Man phenomena, and I wanted to try and understand it from a Christian viewpoint. I never brought it up at church because I was scared to, I didn't want the ridicule. So I really kept it to myself mainly. And then once meeting my husband, we actually met through MySpace. And we had started, communicating on there. And I was like, hey, you're a pastor. I have things I want to ask you. And so we met up, and he was so gentle. And just that approach was such a relief. That he said, let's look through the scripture together. Let's look through and see, what we can understand about this. I don't think that this is necessarily demonic. There's something about you that's attracting this. And I mean, I've spoken with Michelle before, and it seems to be with me, I'm more of a person that I think I'm just filled with light, and this darkness comes around. And again, it's not, here I am in the void and the darkness, here I am with this dark entity that's been around me. Why? I don't know. Am I attracting them with light? Kind of like a moth to flame. But I don't necessarily think it's evil. When I look back at the void, it didn't mean me any harm. I was curious when I first got there. I wasn't scared. My fear built, and I became more and more insecure in what I was experiencing as time went on. It felt like I was over in the void forever. And so that was all of my own making. The void itself was not evil or anything. It didn't feel like a judgment. I honestly, after understanding the space more, believe I was in one of the highest heavens. I was seeing behind the curtain and seeing the inner workings of how all of this came to be. I was at the very primordial, the very beginning and the end. I was there with it all. And so I also kind of extend that towards the Hat Man and with the shadow being. It may not be something evil. Our fear is from the not knowing. And so I think that, again, we've got to give support to people that are having these kind of encounters, because they don't know where to go. They don't know how to, deal with it. And, they don't want to sound crazy or judged or anything. That's the worst thing you could do on top of someone already struggling. So I understand it.
John, can you mute your mic?
We hear you whispering.
Oh, we can hear you, John.
We almost sound like a ghost.
We can hear you.
I heard you whispering.
My phone overheated.
Oh my goodness!
And so it shut off. It shut off.
No.
So I'm just on voice now.
Okay, well, we know you're there. I have got you on screen, but we're glad that you're here with us. We're getting to the top of the hour. Is there anything like anybody would love to share? John, you've been very quiet because you're having technical gremlin issues.
Those gremlins love me.
They do. They do.
I was just saying that, in what Mindy was saying, religion. I was actually in Bible school, and I was feeling very, very oppressed at one point. And I spoke to one of the head people there, and told him, "Hey, I'm feeling really oppressed." And he just flipped around and told me, and these guys are all Southern Baptist based. He flipped around and told me, "Well, you can't be possessed." And I'm sitting there going, that wasn't what I said. And, so they're quick to judge.
Yeah.
And you see this in religious circles, that they're a lot of times they're very narrow-minded about a lot of this stuff. And it actually hurts people, because people actually have questions and they don't know where to go. They are ostracized. They are questioned. I always laugh because I says, if I spoke to some of my friends that are pastors, that graduated from there, that I'd probably burst into flames if I told them some of the stuff that I'd seen and did.
You know,
So,
John, you bring up a good point. You know, I had a son who went to his ecclesiastic leader and he had special gifts. I mean, we all have gifts of certain kinds, whether they're spiritual, whether, you know, like you, Mindy, or the light within you, the spiritual growth that you've done throughout your life. My son was having experiences in the home that where we live and was coming to me about it. And he was very young. Teenager, the Hat Man thing. This Hat Man was called Dan, and we all encountered him. And you never felt evil or bad and stuff, but this ecclesiastic leader told him, said he was the devil. He was full of the devil. And it spun my son out of control in his life, and it did some damage to him. And now he embraces his gift, but at the time when we don't know what we're dealing with that gift, then we can go a different direction. So I appreciate that what John said and stand for, we put ourselves out there, none of us asked for this experiences in our life, but they've come. And our message is to let people know that they have a safe place to share their stories.
Yeah. I think for some of these organizations, they can be very judgmental if what it is a person is dealing with doesn't fit neatly within their view, their worldview or universe view, then it doesn't exist, and or it's evil and bad and these kind of things. So really, unlike what you had said earlier, Mindy, is that we need to get beyond that. This is 2024 going into 2025, and the effort should be for the benefit of all mankind and all living things. So
Start embracing each other's stories and not make fun, even though we think they're crazy and maybe in our mind, the back of our minds. But we don't know, the natural earth could be crazy too. It's chaos. We have chaos and we have order. So I think sometimes the chaos we get to experience in our lives. Well, we appreciate you being on the show. It
we
will
need
have
to have another episode with you on. It's very interesting.
Absolutely.
I want to hear more about your archives, what you've attained, where it's going, what's happening. We can discuss your future plans for your organization, and I really appreciate that. Dan could be on. I know he has a busy schedule. I'm glad that Jonathan made the effort in his car to be on, and even though there's gremlins going on, we kind of nicknamed the gremlins uh, because of the
yeah,
staff.
we embrace the gremlins.
As they showed
uh,
up, one showed up before the show, so we didn't get our show promo. But we want you back, and we appreciate your time and basically archiving the stories that have come, and then your background and you sharing on a personal level with your near death experience. We've all have had those kind of stories in our lives, but it's nice to hear from others, and it reaffirms that not just we're having them, you're having them, the world's having them, and they don't know what to do with them, maybe. And this is why we have this information come out on the show. So we appreciate it. Is there a way that the audience could reach out to you? Do you have an email or something?
Yeah, they can find me. My website is mindytautfest.com. So that's probably the
Yeah.
easiest way. I have an email, nde to uap at gmail.com. So either way, I'm normally pretty responsive. And I just wanted to thank you guys so much for having me. It's such a pleasure and to get to see you and John down there. That's my conference husband, if you don't know.
Yeah, we have a joke around that, right?
He
Mindy's
let me follow
conference
him around
wife.
like a puppy dog at Alien Con.
I
So
love
I'll
it.
always have a special place in my heart for him.
Yeah,
Yeah,
the two.
that'll be a whole nother story next episode.
Uh,
We're all on pins and needles. Thank you, everybody. Please subscribe to our channel. Please join us next week. We have fastened the most fast. Maybe it'll be Mindy again because we're getting to the holiday season, and we need to enjoy this time with our families and enjoy your cookies and the lights and the festivities that are out there. But thank you again,
But
and
be safe. Be
be
safe in all you do.
thank you, Stan, and thank you for our audience, especially. This is where the
Thank
magic
you.
happens, is the questions, and it's good to have you here too.